Ooh. Okay, this is a bit late. But not that as late as I was worrying. Not as late as I was worrying it was going to be. Not as late as I was worrying it was going to be. Okay, hello everyone. Right then, I'm just making sure Twitch is working. And everyone is live at the same time. It's always fun, because sometimes Twitch decides it's just not going to go live at the same time, and it just likes to be fun. It likes to play me up occasionally. It likes to be fun for me, it does. And that reminds me, I've got to have a long conversation with Twitch. We will get Twitch working right. We will. Yes, both are working. Sort of. Sort of, both are working. Okay. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Yeah-da-da-da-da-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Oh, that's not the right slideshow, is it? Okay, sorry. That's an upcoming key aircraft slideshow. Let's sort that one out. So we are the Atlantic Charter, aren't we? It's Atlantic Charter this evening. Yes. That's correct. Hello everyone. Right then, hello. How are we all doing? Apologies for the delay. I had a corgi who got into where the apples fall in the garden. And corgis not only know no fear, they also know no fullness. They know no fear and they know no fullness. The fluffy research assistant is fine, but the fluffy research assistant got caught in the netting which had previously been erected. Then there's now new netting and new stuff erected, because... How do I put this? The netting that had previously been put up, I had been told it wasn't necessary. The netting which I had done last year was not necessary. It was not necessary to do what they called apple knocks. They literally did, that's what the family nicknamed it, apple knocks. They said it wasn't necessary, that there was no need for apple knocks this year, that it wasn't necessary at all. And okay, fine. Fine. Apple knocks not necessary. My sister was going to do it herself. She was an engineer. She's an engineer. She knows what she's doing. So this evening, at about 7:10, I suddenly get a panicked message, and Corky had got caught in the new system, as it hadn't kept him out, but it had trapped him. So after we released the corgi, we then dismantled what my sister had put up, because whilst it was engineeringly perfect, you see, it was designed for a perfect world, not for the malicious ingenuity of a apple-seeking corgi. You see, there is a difference here. In a world where everything is sensible and logical, it would have worked. In a world where you have a malignant intelligence known as an apple-seeking corgi, you need apple knocks. And had to reassemble apple knocks. Luckily, because I did it last year, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I redid it. But yes, Apple, basically, we now have in my garden three closely different three sets of those metal poles you get around building sites sometimes for waist height sort of fencing, and one roll of fencing which has gone between all three sets of those poles backwards and forwards, tied together with a metal frame fencing behind it, and extra stakes added in along the ground, plus boarding along the ground. There is no digging underneath this by Bubby Paws. There is no lifting the fencing by Bubby Paws. There is no climbing the fencing by Bubby Paws. Bubby Paws is not getting in. It does make our garden look like a building site. I do apologise, but it is effective. So I apologise, but that is why I was late. I was establishing Apple Knox. So yes, now the corgi can't get to the apples. The corgi is just going to be staring at the apples, declaring he should be allowed to get to the apples. Right then. Markuch, so effectively you're erecting anti-torpedo nets to repel the corgi. Exactly! You know exactly what was going through my mind. Theory was, if it can stop a torpedo, it has a chance of stopping a corgi. Ah. That equals... It equals a stimulated fluffy research assistant who'll probably be complaining to me regularly about this. But he likes my ingenuity because I'm also the one that sets up the obstacle course occasionally in the garden for him, the agility courses. And he prefers it when I do the agility courses rather than my sister. In fact, he's been known, my sister places the agility courses, to sit there looking at her and just refuse to run it. Because she designs them too easy for him, as far as he's concerned. There isn't much difference between them. It's just I add in a couple more chicanes and I tend to put the things slightly closer together. But I also tend to put the tunnel in an S shape and things like that. He likes it. So it's a wiggly tunnel rather than a straight tunnel. You know. Myron, sorry, wasn't listening. Was looking at T-Rex swim mechanics. Ah, you've seen a corgi swim. Right. So today we're talking about the Atlantic Charter, which seemed appropriate for the year of leadership because the Atlantic Charter is as interesting a piece of leadership as you're ever going to get. Depending on who you are, it's something which starts American involvement in World War II, confirms American involvement in World War II, or just about does as much as the British can manage to get the Americans to do before they actually get involved in World War II, because the Charter was actually done 84 years ago today. It's issued on the 14th of August, 1941. The 14th of August, 1941. And yeah, the Atlantic Charter. It's an interesting thing. It really is. As charters go. And it also, and this is something I'm going to keep emphasizing throughout it, so I might as well start off by emphasizing it, it says exactly as much or exactly as little as both sides wanted to say. Both sides had ambitions of it saying more. Both sides went away dissatisfied in a satisfied, dissatisfied manner. They weren't happy about what they got, but they weren't unhappy about what they got. They both start out with maximal positions, and they accept less than maximal positions. And it's a really interesting thing to look at, considering how Roosevelt and Churchill later on act and how the diplomacy works. It's also interesting to think about, considering the whole mantra of the special relationship and how that's sometimes signified as that starts with the Atlantic Charter. No, 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 no. There is a special relationship between Britain and America, but that special relationship is not built between the politicians. It's built between the many, many layers of government and the many layers of business people and how they work together and how they see and how they find doing business with each other. It's not so much a special relationship as a relationship where uniquely our interests often co-align quite a lot. So often it works out. But when they don't align, it doesn't work out. And that's typified completely by the Atlantic Charter, where the things that are wanted are in benefit of both nations. It works out. When they aren't, it doesn't. And the thing is, neither country goes away and claims it did. It won it. And that's the thing. What you have today is often, if you read the agreements and actual text of the agreements, it often is like that. Often both countries walk away with some concessions and some issues. But the fact is, usually, at least one country, whichever one managed to get to the microphone first, tries to claim they won it. Or alternatively, sometimes they claim the other parties won it, so they don't renegotiate it. Because if you've got most of what you want and you want to keep it that way, the easiest way is to think that the other person, easier way is the thing is to make the other politician, how to put it, the other politician's image, not necessarily the other politicians themselves, but the other politician's image, believe they got one over you. Everything that is true about regular politics is quintuply true when it comes to international relations. International relations is the domestic politics on steroids. It always is. Because it has domestic politics in it, because that's always a factor into your negotiating position and your various rules and what you're prepared to do and what you don't want to do. But it's also got the diplomatic, the domestic politics of multiple other nations involved. It's got multiple other layers of politicians involved, international organizations, everything. Your image and your announcements can be, you might be speaking to one audience, but directing your comments and your pronouncements to a wholly different audience. And then they might be interpreted a third way by another audience entirely without your expecting. This is why, again, international relations often tends to be very boring, okay, in their public pronouncements. Because often the easiest way to stop reinterpretation is to be so boring no one tries to put a spin on it. That is actually a form of spin. Might sound strange, but it is, okay? It's a form of spin. You make such a pronouncement so boring, so humdrum, people don't want to report it, and they just either ignore it or they report it in a few lines very simply. The Finnish diplomatic corps. I love them. I have spent many a good time chatting with the head of the bar at the US Embassy and the head of the bar at the Finnish Embassy. And how many events have I been to where both of them have been invited for some reason? It's amazing. Now, before we go too far in these days, I think I would like to share one little point. For my A-levels, I did quite well. I was quite happy with my A-levels. Okay. My A-level results many, many years ago. I still didn't get into my first choice university. I got into my second choice for my bachelor's. I wanted to go to Royal Holloway. I had flipped a coin and decided I was going to do medieval Roman history instead of naval history. And that meant Royal Holloway for me. Great program. Great way to transition into various things. It was going to be cool. It was going to be cool. And then I didn't get there. I got into St Mary's, University College Twickenham, and if anyone is currently hunting a history degree, history place, I should tell you they require 2 C's to get in. That was my backup choice. And I was immediately advised by pretty much everyone, you've got way better results than that. Go into clearing, do better. I went, no, I actually went round this university. I know it. I liked it. I was quite happy with my backup choice. And I went to it. And that was the right decision for me to do. The point is, and this is a little bit off topic for tonight, but it's worthwhile in case anyone's worrying about it. If you get your A-level results, make your own decision. You're the one who has to live with it. You're the one who has to live with what you decide. And yes, you can always change your mind. In the nicest way, when you're young, in your 20s, you have plenty of time to change your frigging mind. So don't worry. It's not the end of the world. You've got plenty of time to improve your position and change things if you need to in your 20s. But also, do what you want to do. Think about it. And university isn't right for everyone. Again, I know I'm a uni lecturer. I know it's almost blasphemy to say this, but it is the case. There are some very smart people I know who never went to university who make a very good living. And there are some very smart people I know who did go to university who frankly make me look like I'm a multi-millionaire. And I haven't been paid for 2 months by the company I do consultancy for. And even under that circumstance, even just by my the support I have from all of you from Patreon and YouTube, thank you very much for all the super chats, super thanks, all those things. Thank you for all that. I still look like a millionaire compared to them. And there are people within those groups who are happy and people who are unhappy. It's what you choose to make out of your life. A-levels, they're important, but they are just a gate you pass through. They can widen your choice with better results, they can narrow your choice with worse results, but you still have choices. And for anyone who's from the rest of the world, A-levels are what you get when you're 18. They're the exams you go through when you're 18, when you're leaving school. They're school leaving exams. In America, I think they have the SATs in various other things, but in the UK it's A-levels, and you'll do... Well, you can do 3 or 4 topics. I did as my 3 primary university. Well, I did almost 5. I did history, ICT. That was information communication technology, i.e. computing, with programming and coding on the side, and physics. Maths was my half A level, and politics was also added in there. As said, I came off my 3 primary A levels. I didn't get enough marks. I got a C in ICT, okay? In a year where you had to remember and handwrite out code from memory in the exam. And I did that. But with my dysgraphia, they still had trouble reading it. Unsurprisingly. Anyway, leaving that to one side, I got a C in ICT. In that year, getting a C put you above 97% of the rest of the country because they misjudged the grade so badly. That's why I didn't get into Royal Holloway. In the nicest way, I don't see myself doing badly. So enjoy it. And I had to say that because the reason Garius, of course, is so busy at the moment is because of clearing, because of his involvement in his work and all the other universities and stuff going on. So at the moment, I'm actually having fun looking at some of my university colleagues and just going, so you're busy? Yeah, I'm not. I managed to. I didn't take the bait to be an admissions tutor this year. In a nice way, still recovering from pneumonia and decided I wasn't that desperate for money. I'd like money. I need money for going to Japan. I need all this sort of things, but I wasn't desperate enough to want to do an admissions tutor again. Besides, almost every other year I do it, I end up with an ear infection because of the headphones. No. Anyway, so this was actually also the second Allied conference, okay? So this is the point. The Allies exist before the Americans actually join World War II. The more you read into the history, whilst, again, I don't think Roosevelt was ever going to manufacture a reason for a war with Germany. I don't think he ever thought he was going to need to. He is very much getting involved on the Allied side because he does see it coming. And because also it's very difficult for him not to. You see, we often talk about the pro-German, pro-neutral pressure on Roosevelt. There is just as much pressure on him to join the Allies. It's very easy to talk about the sentiment which is against it because they're very visible in terms of the fact that America joins it. So therefore, the people who were pro it sort of meld into the ongoing background and the continuum, and no one really notices them. But they are just as present. And that is part of the reason he's doing this. This is part of the reason why he is taking all his admirals, including King, with him to come and meet Churchill. And so, yeah, this is months. This is taking place. This is the second meeting, the first in-person meeting of Churchill and Roosevelt. And it's the 9th to 12th August, 1941. Just remember that. America doesn't join the war till after they're attacked on the 7th of December, 1941. Until after Germany declares war. So there is literally meetings going on. Literally, Winston Churchill and Roosevelt have met months before they join the war. Months before it starts to happen. And again, this is realpolitik in play. That's what it is. Realpolitik. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's the way it goes. So that being said, let's consider who actually comes to the meeting and who is officially listed versus who's unofficially listed and who they are and what they are. Now, I have got that up, and I've got that up. We have, from the United States of America, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Ernest J. King, Admiral, U.S. Navy, Harold R. Stark, Admiral, U.S. Navy, George C. Marshall, General, U.S. Army, Henry H. Arnold, Major General, U.S. Army Air Forces, Harry Hopkins, officially Presidential Advisor, and W. Averell Harriman, Special Envoy to Europe, and also the guy who's in charge of the various aid programs and Lend-Lease. This is not sounding much like a diplomatic meeting, is it? There's no Secretary of State. This sounds like a government working meeting. These are all people who are working in government. This is supposed to be a major diplomatic meeting, and the head diplomat gets left behind. This is a major diplomatic meeting with a warring partner where you're supposed to be just discussing diplomacy, and look at who's there for the Americans. Then let's consider who's there from the British. Winston Churchill. Okay. General Sir John Dill of the British Army. Alrighty. Admiral of the Fleet Sir Dudley Pound, Royal Navy. Okay. Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfred Freeman, Royal Air Force. Intriguing. Permanent Under Secretary Sir Alexander Cadogan. Okay, we really are coming heavy. Very senior civil servant there. And Minister of Supply, Lord Beaverbrook. Ooh. And the Governor and Vice Admiral Sir Humphrey Whalen, who's Dominion of Newfoundland, who's Governor and is technically the host. Because this is happening in Newfoundland. So, what does this meeting sound like to everyone? Does this sound like a diplomatic meeting? A group who are getting together to discuss diplomacy? Does this sound like a group who are going to spend a long time discussing diplomacy? Does this sound like who you call for a massive diplomatic meeting? And I want you to remember this group when we finally get to reading through the charter itself. Because it's going to be really interesting for you all to think about whether this is the group who'd really spend hours, days, because they're talking apparently from the 9th to the 12th of August, discussing this kind of document. What do we think? Cadogan was Foreign Office. Cadogan is special, okay? Cadogan is special, is what we'll talk about Cadogan. He is... yes, he is... He is assigned to the Foreign Office. He is assigned to the Foreign Office. That is where he hangs his hat. But he is, for a Foreign Office, curiously informed, well informed of both sides of the information divide. If you've ever read his diaries, they are a really interesting read, and I highly recommend them. Cadogan's diaries, if you can get a copy of them, are really worth a read. He's also one of the last great, I would argue, chairs of the BBC board, because when he was appointed to the board, he expressed he didn't have the appropriate qualifications. Churchill's response, because Churchill appointed him, was, there are no qualifications. All you have to do is be fair. And sensible, I suppose, Cadogan added. Churchill nodded. He served from 52 to 57. Diaries were published first in 1971. And you have to remember there is a large chunk which you have to read between the lines with information that has been more recently published. I'd say that's a head honcho meeting with the diplomatic legwork already done about biblical background. Honestly, my suspicion, and once we read the charter you'll get to the suspicion, is that the charter was probably knocked out by about 4 people in about half an hour, and those 4 people were probably Roosevelt, Churchill, Cadogan, and my strong suspicion for the other American being who was involved would be Harry Hopkins. I honestly think that was probably that's probably who knocks the charter out in about half an hour, especially when you consider the variations of it that have come before. So, with that all being said, and these lovely people being discussed, it's a very military-focused. For a diplomatic meeting, I would say this is a very military-focused group. Admittedly, this is a military alliance, yes, but there is very much a lack of civilian oversight on both sides. This is overwhelmingly armed forces. In fact, honestly, it's overwhelmingly naval. When we consider at this meeting, there are 4 admirals, 2 Royal Navy, 2 US Navy. There are 4 admirals at this meeting. In other words, there are 2 Army generals, 2 Air Force officers, and 4 admirals. So there are more admirals. The admirals at this meeting equal the combined strength of the Air Force and the Army officers. In fact, let's see. There are 6 civilians, so there are almost as in terms of the if we exclude the leaders, Roosevelt and Churchill, there are as many naval officers as there are civilians there. Anyone think what the actual criteria of this meeting might be to do with? Especially considering one of them is the naval officer in charge of the American Atlantic Fleet. And another one's in charge of is the first Sea Lord in coordinating Royal Navy operations, and there's also stuff happening in Atlantic at this point, and there's the American neutrality patrols currently being expanded out, and one of the senior officers involved in neutrality in the Royal Navy's convoying operations is, of course, Sir Humphrey Whalen, who's the governor of Newfoundland, as well as doing that. And you just start to think, is this meeting about the Atlantic Charter, or is this meeting about the Atlantic? It's an interesting point of view. It's an interesting discussion to have. And then we have what they met on and what they brought to the table, because that's special. The Royal Navy brings HMS Prince of Wales, escorted by HMS Ripley, HMCS Assiniboine, and HMCS Restouche. So 3 destroyers. The US Navy brings USS Augusta, escorted by USS Tuscaloosa, USS McDonald, USS Madison, USS Moffett, USS Simpson, and USS Winslow. I'd argue that's because the US Navy it's got the heavy cruisers. They are far more flexible. No one. Basically, I have this sinking suspicion that King had no wish to show up in any of his battleships to this discussion because of how his battleships would look compared to the Prince of Wales. So he bought his Brest cruisers as his flagship, so he could run around. The thing is, though, it does kind of show the differential, because the US is able to bringing all these destroyers. The British, they're bringing 3. They got a battleship. They're traveling the whole way across the Atlantic. To an extent, that's the US providing some extra security in the area, just in case people turn up. But, it's enough force. let's be honest, this is... If this task force was stumbled upon by, let's say, a German surface raider suddenly appearing, there is no surface raider which is going to enjoy this argument. I'm sure, considering some of the comments I've got on the recent video I did with Drac about Dreadnought designs and Dreadnoughts that might have been, I'm sure there's at least one person out there who thinks that, you know, if you have Bismarck or Tirpitz, if you had Tirpitz turn up in this fight, she'd annihilate them all, because apparently the 14-inch shells of the King George V can do no damage at all to a battleship of the caliber of Bismarck and Tirpitz. I kid you not, that's what they wrote in the comment. I have sent the comment through to Drac. I've told him if he wants to, he can respond in my comments, or we can do it, or, you know, we can just ignore it. But just to see what happens, basically. Be fun. But the thing is, 2 heavy cruisers, Prince of Wales, and 8 destroyers. That's a force which you do not want to come for. That's a force you do not want to fight against. Now, you might have already noticed that in this picture there is a very nice young strapping army officer providing support for Roosevelt as he walks around to keep him steady on the ship. And in this one, of course, he's sitting down. They take great care to make sure he is pictured appropriately and the right image is sent out. It's perfectly natural. Honestly, the reason why the Royal Navy turned up probably with Prince of Wales is because she's a visible symbol of the war they're fighting. The British have a battleship which is actually fought at Denmark Straits, whose sister was part of the putting down of that enemy ship. The British can visibly show their ships are fighting the war. That's, in the nicest way, once you look at these ships, you realise the Royal Navy is basically showing up and going, yeah, we're fighting. They didn't quite show up with ships which were scarred with battle wounds, etc., and, you know, maybe bits of, you know, blackened hull from damage. But they've done the next best thing of showing up with ships which people know have been in combat. They know they've been fighting. And it's no surprise to me that Prince of Wales is also one of the ships which they are going to be sending to the Eastern Fleet. They're going to be sending the Force Z, because, again, this is about making a statement to the Americans about what we are as allies, about our power. So now you're showing up with a battleship which has been in combat, which has been fighting the war. Britain's been showing its willingness to keep fighting. We will keep fighting until this war is over. This is why we're asking you to support us, because we're the ones defending democracy here. And oh, by the way, this battle-scarred battleship, this battleship which has already fought, oh yeah, we're going to send it to Singapore. So it's there to help deal with the Japanese as a threat. That's why the British show up with what they're doing. And, as Michael Gooch is pointing out, including the Royal Canadian Navy, says it's the Empire is fighting, not just the British. The Empire is doing this. And again, Gary Zukov, why would they go for ships damaged when they're going for diplomatic mission? Because sometimes the point you're making is more. Look, turning up with pristine model ships in the middle of a war, these are ships which haven't been fighting. Are you using your force? Why are you bringing ships which haven't, which are pristine? Turning up with ships which have been fighting shows your grit. It shows your strength. It shows your capabilities. It's drumming home a point. It's like the Americans showing up with cruisers. Another reason they don't show up their other capital ships is they're showing what they're prepared to give in the Atlantic. Their major fleet is going to be in the Pacific. The British know this, but they're showing a surfeit of destroyers and a surfeit of and some cruisers. That is what they're prepared to provide the Atlantic. In both these scenarios, both are showing what they have to give the other. The British are showing that they have war-tested, war-proven assets and abilities. For the Americans, they're showing, look, we have all these destroyers. We have these cruisers. We have a battle fleet as well. You know that, but it's not here because it's all over there dealing with the Japanese. This is in many ways, we talk a lot about how when they sort of start deciding, you know, who's going to be fighting where they're going to be fighting. It's happening already at this point. Waving the bloody shirt is the oldest tactics of propaganda. Look, in the nicest way, some of the oldest paintings of my family members are of men and sometimes women in various forms of armor with blood on their chainmail. And trust me, it's not their blood that's being depicted. And there is a reason for that. And if you go round some of the older galleries, especially some of the more ducal and more senior families, and you know, it's an honest thing. And there was even a phrase for a noble after they'd been in battle: had they been blooded? And that meant had they spilled someone's blood and had it splashed on them. Now that's a bit gory. It is a bit gory. But it also meant something. It meant they'd actually fought in battle. They'd actually been in combat. They were combat tested and proven. They are therefore a level of reliability and strength beyond that. Sorry, camera just flashed again, didn't it? Oy, caramba. I'll have to get that sorted out at some point. Honestly, Knight, there in a nicer way for this mission, they could have picked other things. You have to remember, the other option would have been to replace those other ships in their roles with Prince of Wales to get them out of it. Yeah, I know, but the new camera's roughly £300, so we'll sort that out at some point. They suck you in with a good deal of a great camera for £100 and something, and then, yeah. Then it starts to go wrong and you go, ooh, I need a new one. It's showing your work instead of just boasting about it. Yeah. It's the classic thing of, how do I put this politely? The amount of people I know who still go, when they go into, you know, they go to meetings and go to interviews especially, and they wear their university or their old school tie. I completed this place. I survived this place. Timu, Drac got what I got. We've got the same camera. It's also the same camera Garius has. Mine's just gone a bit weird, and I have no idea why. It could be again to do with the power issues we had here, which mucked up my computer, remember? So that it got the power issues, but also had the thing fall on it, which wasn't really helpful. So it could be the power issues have also mucked up the camera. Or it could be the cables, but yeah. Okay? These things happen. It gets used a lot. And it gets worse as it gets hot, and that is hot. That is very, very hot. Oh, no. Timu, no, I don't want his filming camera that's also used for webcam. That's even more expensive. That's even more expensive. I have a power system on there. Chris Hansen. Don't take this the wrong way. In this room alone, there are 8 of these full of books. And there's a few boxes upstairs and over in the corner which need to be unloaded. There is some books by Defoe, though, somewhere around here. So, but I have no idea where that is. It might be in the boxes, it might be in one of the shelves. Sorry. Professional naval historian. I basically, in the nicest way, when I move house, it's moving my books. In the nicest way, there was an entire truck of books which came from the house. So, you can't see a book. That good, but just mean it's because basically these shelves are what I'm grabbing for what I'm currently working on. Usually, the shelves these are in grabbing range shelves, and then there are the shelves which I actually have to get out the thing to go for. Right then. So, once we get through this, well, let's consider what the objectives were for each side. And that's an interesting thing, because there's the posted objectives, and this is what we're going on. These are the posted objectives for each side. Now, here is the reality. The objectives for the British are to get the Americans more involved in the war. Because you have to remember, Churchill's cunning plan the whole way through is if he wants to shore up the position against Germany, guarantee its defeat, and deal with some of the issues in Europe and counterbalance the Soviet Union while doing it, and he knows he's going to end up having to do that, he needs America to get involved. He needs America to get involved. It makes things easier. They've already had the destroyers for bases deal, and they've done all sorts of other lovely operations. But realistically, Roosevelt was attempting also to tie Britain to war aims which suited him. He wanted war aims which suited what Roosevelt wanted from the world, and what Roosevelt wanted from the world were not necessarily aligned with what Britain wanted. This is worthwhile considering. What Britain wanted versus what others wanted. Mainly, for Roosevelt, he was very keen to avoid what he saw as the problems of the Treaty of Versailles. He didn't want punitive actions to be known. And originally, the Charter was not called the Atlantic Charter, it was called the Joint Declaration of the President and Prime Minister. But it was the Daily Herald, which was a Labour Party supporting paper, which used the term and coined it, and then Churchill decided that sounded really good, and he used the term on 24th August 1941, and that was why it came into existence. I would also point out, the actual charter is, whilst we say it's the 14th of August, Roosevelt doesn't give a final copy to Congress till the 21st of August 1941. There's no formal document. The nearest, Roosevelt often said, the nearest thing you'll get to one is the message of the radio operator on Augusta and Prince of Wales. There's no formal document. But it's fun. There were some errors in the London text, but they were corrected. And Yeah. The actual quote and fun point for this and this whole thing and the whole point of the Atlantic Charter and what's read into it, and we'll be talking about Atlantic Charter after the Shameless book plug, actually going through the documents, is that the British Constitution and Atlantic Charter were considered alike by Roosevelt. The document did not exist, yet all the world knew about it. Among his papers, he had found one copy signed by himself and me, but strange to say, both signatures were in his own handwriting. And that was Roosevelt saying that. Among his papers, he found a single copy signed by both himself and Churchill, but both signatures were in Roosevelt's handwriting. So, this is the point. This is more about a cover for meetings. It is a reason for meeting, not necessarily what the meeting is about. Once you start considering all the people involved, all the personalities, all the people standing around and chatting away, and what their involvements are, yeah. And I really do think, that Stark and Dudley Pound got on very well, that a lot of the senior officers did get on quite well, and King himself apparently quite liked Prince of Wales. He thought she was quite a nice ship. And let's be honest, if King is giving praise to a Royal Navy ship, she's got to be good. I realise there is a lot of phraseology put around about the King George V class, but they were quite smart battleships. I might personally have preferred them to have 9 15-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, or 9 16-inch guns if I could my dream in 3 triple turrets, but that wasn't the case to be. They went with a 14-inch gun. They didn't even get the 12-14s. They got 10. But still, it works out. 9 15-inch 45s would have been far nicer though, to bear in mind. And would probably not have had the issues which you had. Nine 15-inch 50s would have been even better. But yeah, that would require us going back in time and building the F3. And that would change history so much that, frankly, we might be dealing with a very different class of battleship rather than the joyous things known as the King George V's. But yes, the objectives for each side were simple, straightforward. And we're at the Shameless book plug, where I get to say thank you to everyone for supporting the channel. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for making everything possible. For some of you who don't know, yes, the Japan trip funding drive has started. Yes, we have got quite a big salt there because, you know, if Fleet's going to go, we need to make sure we can buy his plane ticket. The plane tickets are the expensive things to Japan. Organising the whole Japan trip is going to be fun. But it should work. It should all work out and should be good. Currently, as I sit here and talk to you, the Japan trip has been funded. £130 come in, which is nice. That is a nice amount that's come in. We do need to do more fundraising though. We do need to raise a lot more money for that one. It's funny to think that this year, to fund the ship-shaped trip, realistically we need to get about 15 grand in before we go. And total is about 30 grand if we're going to fund everyone's travels. I know there are people like Dr. Dan, who pretty much always self-funded and you know, because we very rarely raise the money for all of us. But it'd be nice to be able to support them. And I know it's a lot of money. It's a lot of history, but it is a lot of money. I have actually also, and this is something again, once again I have costed out and going to bring this up in the Historiathon as a goal, if I raise enough money, a history trip of my own to America, to go and see what's going on in America, and go and see some naval history out there. Could be a lot of fun. Could be a lot of fun. But it's going to be a case of, if I do get it sorted out, and if I do get to go, I'll want to make sure I'm going to places where I'm going to be able to meet people, like Jack Ray and many others who support me from America, because I get so much funding. Paul from Chicago, Jack Ray, all these people who have been so kind to this channel from the very beginning. And there are many others as well who I really would love to bump into and go, hello, let's find a burger, let's sit down and have a chat, because you've always been so kind and supportive. I look forward to that. Yeah. VJ Day is the 15th of August. Anyway, with that being said, and with camera flickering away in an annoying way, by gum. The Charter. Now, you'll be unsurprised to hear that originally the Charter was longer. Because have a think about it. This Charter is 8 points. Considering the biblical inclination of both Roosevelt and Churchill, there were originally 10. Originally 10. And the negotiations that go on to get them and to transfer it through, and how they were thinking and how they are feeling, you know, evolves it. It evolves it. It changes it. Let's start off with an easy one. Number 1, no territorial gains sought by United States or United Kingdom. Rather strange that, considering the United States is not currently in a war. In August 1941, the USA isn't at war, yet now they are signing up to no territorial gains. And let's be honest, do the UK want to regain any territory from Germany? Or Italy? Maybe Italy. Maybe some of the African territories. Probably not. But there again, the British will probably find a way of... They're not seeking territorial gains. No, they're just handing it off to their African dominions. That's what they probably do it. How do they do it? But then, number 2, any territorial adjustments that were done must be in accord with the wishes of the peoples concerned. Oh, I can see where this is going to cause trouble. I can see where this is going to cause trouble. Can we all see where that one's going to cause trouble? It's not wrong. It's fair. I support it. I agree with it. But it's going to cause trouble. We can all see where it's going to cause trouble. Number 3. All people have a right to self-determination. Okay. So, 2 and 3 are going to cause issues. Big issues for imperial powers. Big issues for post-war organization. There are gonna be issues. There will be issues with this. You know, it makes sense. There's nothing in it disagreeable, but it's just gonna cause issues. Thank you, right, Sublet. That sounds fun. Number 4. This is a good thing for an economy like America, which is building up during the war, not being bombed. But for nations which are being bombed to smithereens and going to have to rebuild their domestic industry, this could actually be a very bad thing. Trade barriers were to be lowered for all involved. Now, it sounds like a good thing if you consider that you don't want, you know, countries which have been under the threat of war to be destroyed. And then facing massive trade barriers to their economies growing so they can rebuild themselves after the war, and so you don't end up with a Treaty of Versailles situation. But, and here is the problem, if you're a country like Britain, and post-war you're seeking to rebuild your domestic market, well, the trouble is, the cost to rebuild factories and retool factories is going to be considerably more expensive in Britain than it's going to be in America, isn't it? Because you're rebuilding the economy from a total war economy which has been being bombed, rather than from a total industrialization economy which is being attacked but not being blitzed. This is a problem. It sounds like such a good thing, and to the free trade advocates of the time, it really is. But as I've said before, the worst thing to have in politics is an ideology. Ideologies make you stupid. Ideologies make you think there's a one size solution to all problems, and there really isn't. This is the reality I often get into trouble in, because, as I've said before, if I am any form of politics, I'm a very old school, original form of conservatism, which was the belief that you should never make decisions based in ideology. It was an anti-ideology. You should always look at the evidence and go with a solution which best fit the evidence and the problem, not an ideological solution. So, if your ideology is always lower taxes, that's great. But lower taxes also don't pay for things. So how are you going to pay for this? Are you going to put up... Are you borrowing? What are you going to do? But there again, higher taxes don't always help as well. Because you tax too much, you damage the economy and stop growth. You need to get it right. You need to be sensible. And it's the same with this kind of economic policy and trade policy. There are reasons to be protectionist. There are reasons to have protectionism in place. It is a phrase which does, as Carl McGuinness pointed out, called trade balance. Now again, there is nothing bad with free trade. In fact, as lowering trade barriers is a very good thing when everyone is in a similar economic position and similar status position. When they are in different positions, when they are economically divergent due to the various actions that have been wrought on their economy, then there are problems with it. Then we have point 5. There's the economic cooperation between the powers and a mutual agreement to the advancement of social welfare. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does economic cooperation mean? What does a mutual agreement to the advancement of social welfare? A general improvement in the quality of life of people? That sounds like a nice thing to sign up. Who's going to argue against that? But what does it actually mean? What are you going to do? What's concrete here? And 6, the participants would work for a world free of want and fear of war, or threat of war. Well, that sounds nice in theory. It does. But speaking as a conflict management specialist, hence the talk I'm giving at King's in November, someone who deals with deterrence of conflict and how you do it, the threat of war, as in the actual war-fighting capability of the nations involved, is often the thing which best preserves peace. So the only way you can achieve that is if you manage to disarm everyone, so no one could wage war. Are you going to do that? Well, at this point, everyone's busily arming up as much as they physically can, and as much as we are watching and fighting Germany at this point, the person who is the most conscious of the threat of the Soviet Union post-war is sitting in this negotiation, banging it into everyone's heads at the same time as all this is going on. His name is Winston Churchill. He has absolutely no faith in the word of Stalin. He'll work with him, because that's how you win a war. He doesn't trust him long term, and he doesn't trust the Soviet Union. They are just as big a dictatorship, they are just as big a threat, they are just as monolithic as the fascists. It sounds nice, though. Sounds so nice. 7, the participants would work for freedom of the seas. Again, there's nothing wrong in that. It's a beautiful thing. Freedom of seas, freedom of navigation is something we've all been working for a long time because it's the best for trade. And then 8, and this is the one which I find the most disagreeable. There was to be a definite disarmament of aggressor nations and a common disarmament after the war of some kind. In other words, you know what? Those naval treaties after World War I really worked so well to bring about eternal peace. They brought peace for everyone. They did. They brought peace for the world. Let's do it again. Let's repeat it, because after all, we'll get it right this time. The Atlantic Charter. And I'm moving the camera because I just don't want to move myself. And if you're really feeling cruel, and I'll do this, these scribbles are apparently Winston Churchill's. Look at how he's been editing and deleting stuff. Look at how he works through this document. And this is apparently copy number 1. Private Office, 12th August 1941. I would say the only piece of paper which had previously recently before this been waved around so ineffectually, or rather, piece of paper which had so much meaningless word on it, had been when Chamberlain returned from his meeting with Hitler. But leaving that to one side, what is the fact about these words is you can read a lot into them, and I would say this about the Atlantic Charter. It starts off as meaningless. It gains meaning over time. As people start doing things in the name of these words, as people start acting in these words. I'm always so worried when he pauses. I'm afraid he's going to pick me to give the answer. No. I was never the lecturer who did that in seminars. I'd do it, wait till the end of the seminar, and then I'd ask questions. See if people have been paying attention before they could run out. It does sound so nice. It does sound. Phi means what. There is. Everything in here can be read into mean whatever you want it to mean. Oh. Number 8 is a heck no for the British. Oh. There are also the goal to be concerned. These are goals and wants. Work for and some kind is doing a lot here. Yeah. The thing is about this is it signs you up to all the good things, but doesn't explain A, how you're going to get there, and B, what level of good thing you're going to achieve. Also, oh, that's a good one, downright troddle. I'm going to remember that one. No students ever used that on me, though. I would add that if we use 8, there is to be a definite disarmament of aggressor nations and a common disarmament after the war of some kind. Well, you can certainly argue there is a conventional disarmament after World War II. However, they suddenly have all discovered nuclear weapons and are busily arming with those instead. So, but you are technically living up to it, and there was a disarmament of Japan and Germany. Not really of Italy, but we'll leave that to one side. Italy, by that point, had switched sides, and, everyone loved them by the end of the war. They were everyone's favourite pal at that point. It happens. It always happens. But this is the way of the world. This is the way of international relations. This is politics. And it's fun. Now, the interesting thing is when we start to consider what those at the conference really did think of it. What did they really, really think of it? And truthfully, it's a bit of a nightmare. The big thing that comes from it is that, and this is Beaverbrook's main focus in this type of thing, is talk about what logistics are coming to Britain, and that's what it's working for. It was assumed by both the British and the Americans that in any future organisation which would come from the Charter, something to replace the League of Nations which hadn't worked, Britain and America would have an equal role to play. They would have an equal role to play. Now, there is a reason why I was careful about saying this was not Roosevelt and Churchill's first meeting, but their first meeting during the war. They'd had a dinner which they'd been to at a place called Gray's Inn, which is one of the Inns of Court in London, in July 1918. They'd met then. I would also add that for this meeting, in this trip, officially, Roosevelt was supposed to be on a 10-day fishing trip. A 10-day fishing trip. You often go, sir, do you often go fishing with 2 cruisers and a whole set of destroyers? Yes. You see, some go fishing with line and reel. I go fishing with 8-inch shells. High explosive, fire at that shoal. Sir, this might be cheating. I don't care. I'm President Roosevelt. Sorry, this is every time I read that reasoning given and the fact he's fishing from an 8-inch cruiser, it's what goes through my head, that he's using a 14 shell for fishing. I know the fishing trips to cover story 96831 is just... The trouble is he's going fishing, and it's known he's off on a fishing on an 8-inch gun cruiser. I mean, it's just... Yeah. It's a fun time. Now, what did the conference really feel about it? If we start off with Roosevelt, he has real hope that it's something he can take to the Democrats and to the people who are anti-war and go, look, it's peaceful. We are... You know, these are our war aims. They're not like World War One. It's not like the Treaty of Versailles. It's not going to be nasty to the Germans. It's going to be an honourable peace. Look at these lovely war aims. Look at this Atlantic. These are our war aims. For Churchill, going away from this, he's able to go, well, I haven't declared war on Germany, but let's be honest, while some of those bits are seriously anti-empire and seriously anti-what we are and what we are as a nation, they're far worse for the fascist powers. And then we have the naval officers at it. Honestly, King comes away... I think he rather likes Pound. Stark definitely likes Pound. Honestly, most of what you come away with is a confirmation, realistically, beyond the Charter, are a whole lot of interoperational agreements made about how the forces are going to work together, how the British and American forces will work together. And this is important, because frankly, the other allies don't matter in this scenario. The biggest forces in the room are talking. The British are the guiding force for the Empire forces and the other allied forces, and the Americans are going to be the other big forces in the room. As not anything they agree about how you interoperate and work together is going to become the standard for everyone else, whether they like it or not. This is one of the things I find funny when we consider ABDA command and how long it takes to organise that and form that up. They'd already been having meetings about the Atlantic. No one had worked out the command structure for the sodding Pacific. Okay? Japan's a threat. So much of one that Britain and Japan have been literally pointing guns at each other in January 1939, January 1940, January 1938, January 1937, and January 1935. Literally pointing guns at each other. Serve the Americans and the Japanese. And yet... there is a war going on, and they are, even though this is one of the ships which, they are aboard, literally one of the ships which the British are promising to send to the Far East to help reinforce the position out there, they don't sort out ABDA command, they spend a lot of time sorting out the Atlantic. But, you know, life happens. Life happens. It's a really interesting scenario, though, to work out if they spend as much time on the Far East. The interesting question was that actually at one point there was a potential Tom Phillips might have gone on to the meeting, and there is the whole thing of if Phillips did go, does he get the Commander-in-Chief Far East appointment? In which case, does he go out with 4C, or does he have to send someone else out to command the ships because he's got to coordinate everyone from the Singapore? Does he end up being trapped like Cunningham was trapped in Alexandria, Tom Phillips becomes trapped in Singapore coordinating everything. It's an interesting point to consider. It really is. But overall, the Americans didn't get the sign up to a new world order of their own imagination that they wanted. But Roosevelt did continue his often, and this is something which I see from a lot of Americans, they get very worried about the British having an uncodified constitution. There are some very erudite Americans who always get worried about Britain's uncodified constitution. I have tried to explain in the past that when in the UK, with the uncodified constitution, as a rule, the bits that, whilst it's written down in many documents, the bits that aren't written down are actually harder for politicians to violate than the bits which are. You see, the bits which are written down in terms of words. The bits which aren't written down are in terms of spirit. And the thing is, it's far easier to violate the letter of the law than it is the spirit of the law. The letter of the law, you can use different letters to describe what you're doing. Codified constitution, in terms of when we talk about constitutional law, Verdun, a codified constitution means it's written down as one core separate document. Uncodified constitution means it doesn't necessarily mean it's not written down at all. It means it's not written down as one core document. Now, the interesting thing is, King's theoretically not intended to be commander-in-chief, but he is heading in that direction already. He is kind of impressing Roosevelt, and that's one of the things that happens on this trip. He does seriously impress Roosevelt. But he is expected to be commander-in-chief at the Atlantic. He is CNC of the Atlantic, and he is in charge of the Atlantic. And so coordinating all the Atlantic operations is something which he's supposed to be involved in working with the British. So him being there makes a lot of sense. It depends on what you're talking about in terms of the Constitution. I would say the fact is, the UK Constitution, there are times when I will argue that it should be codified, and there are parts I'm happy it isn't. It's complicated because sometimes it allows us for rapid, nuanced advancement, and sometimes it makes for a mess because often the rebalance is painful to watch. There's a codified constitution, people know exactly where the lines are. An uncodified constitution, sometimes people think there's a margin for grey, and they wander between them, and they think they can push. And if we think about the UK, I would argue the quickest fall from grace in prime ministerial terms. The reason prime ministers usually fall from grace is they break the in spirit parts of the Constitution. If you think about what's happened and how quickly prime ministers in the UK go, it's usually because they've broken the spirit of the Constitution, not anything else. That's usually the quickest way they get out of it. If we go back to Margaret Thatcher, again, what ends up her falling is she's breaking the spirit of the Constitution. We start going with Tony Blair. He starts off with a really interesting approach to cabinet government, which is working for him. It's sofa cabinet government. But as it starts to break down, that's why he falls apart. Gordon Brown has a similar issue. There are economic factors, and there's always other political factors as well, but the moment you start breaking the spirit of the Constitution, the system starts to work against you. And that's the problem. I do think the president at least came back with some fish. And yeah, the UK Constitution is... Well, UK law, the fact that so much UK law is actually common law and is by precedent, ooh, rather than the stature, ooh, that causes fun. That causes so much fun. And that's actually the real problem. Codifying the UK Constitution, this was the actual conversation I had with someone who's a constitutional law specialist in the UK, is that deciding what you leave in and what you take out of the UK codified constitution, if you put together such a document and wanted to vote it through by the public, would be sufficiently divisive that it's easier to just not touch it. It's easier to just not touch it. We'll leave that one side. We don't write the acts on vellum anymore, I think. I think we've stopped that because of, if I'm not mistaken, the various reforms of government and vegetarians didn't like it. So let's consider how the other allies reacted to the Charter. And here is the Charter in one of its forms. It gets more beautiful as time goes on. Now, here is the fun thing. The Inter-Allied meeting in London on the 24th September 1941, which is met by Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, and Yugoslavia, together with the Soviet Union and the Free French, all unanimously adopt the principles of the policy set forth by Britain and the United States. In January 1942, after, of course, the Americas entered World War II, it's adopted by a larger group of nations, and they issue the Joint Declaration of the United Nations. And yes, the United Nations, of course, is what is the founding of the modern UN. It's a fun time. It's a fun time. And honestly, Timu, the 3,000 books joke, it's probably not enough. It's not enough. Basically, by changing from League of Nations to United Nations, the idea was you were going to give it more teeth. But also you have to remember, the Americans had specifically decided not to join the League of Nations despite being the power who'd pushed for its creation. Wilson's 14 points, Wilson's obsession. They had to get away from that. And by joining the United Nations the way they did, Roosevelt made sure that he didn't repeat a Wilson. Timu, all I will ask you to do is look up how many volumes of common law precedent there are in the UK. It'll keep you busy all night. Now, here's the really fun thing. Think about all these things signed up to, and then think about the Soviet Union signing up to it. The Soviet Union. Think about all the Soviet Socialist republics. All of the different republics currently under the USSR. And they've just signed an agreement which, as it says, and this is the point, no territorial gains. Any territorial adjustments that were done must be in accord with wishes of the peoples concerned. All people had a right to self-determination. And trade barriers are to be lowered for all involvement. For all involved. The Soviet Union has just signed this document. Think about that. So what is this document really about? Is it about an Atlantic Charter setting up a new world order? Or is it about having some great words to say in diplomacy and publishing in newspapers? Oh, 92. Yeah, yes, but League of Nations would have taken away sovereignty from Congress. Realistically, so, this is the thing, is all these organizations do. All supranational organizations take some sovereignty away, because the moment you sign into a permanent alliance, a permanent agreement, you are pooling some of your sovereignty for a reason. You're sharing it between nations. You're all sharing your sovereignty between nations for some reason. Some goal. Sometimes it's good to do it, sometimes it's bad to do it. In the case of the 1920s, if you consider how much the Americans were in favour of the naval treaties and those things, being part of the League of Nations would probably have added to it in terms of stability a lot. Knife killing, officially these fit with what the Soviets have been claiming to want for 20 years and doing nothing to actually achieve. Yes. Didn't the Soviets try to push their state into the UN to gain more votes? Yeah, there was a bit of fun with that one. That one got shot down. It got shot down. When they did realise there'd be a problem with that. It's basically, it only works once they set up some of their states as independent countries within the Warsaw Pact scenario, rather than in the USSR scenario. And that's part of the reason for the transition to the Warsaw Pact. Exactly, Michael Cooch. Charter is your entry fee into the top table. People who don't sign it lose influence in planning it. Sign it cynically, ignore it later. The whole point is, I would say more importantly, is that this charter is about setting a differential between what the bad people want and what the good people want. The good people on this side have all signed this charter. The bad people on this side who we're fighting haven't signed this charter. And it works. It does. To an extent. I would say the UN is... The UN is set up in such a way that, honestly, the Security Council must be listened to. As long as the Security Council members are all in agreement, the UN can act. And that's both the advantage and the disadvantage of it. As long as the UN Security Council is prepared to act, they can do something. If the UN Security Council isn't prepared to act, then they have issues. But also, I would argue that's because, realistically, the UN depends on the UN Security Council for its enforcement. That's what the Security Council is about. And realistically, that's why membership of the Security Council is usually limited to people who are to nations who are global powers. They may be superpowers, they may not be superpowers, but they are global powers in that they have a global logistics ability, so they can reach anywhere in the world to influence events anywhere in the world. This is why I worry about the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. This is why I worry about the French equivalent. This is why I talk about logistics and numbers of ships constantly, because people think your seat on the council is preserved the Security Council is because of nuclear weapons and historical status. No, it's always been about having global reach and the ability to reach and influence events around the world. If you are a global power, you could be on the Security Council, because you could be called up and could be expected to affect events anywhere in the world if necessary. If you don't, yeah. Basically, it's a seat at a table time. And the people who get the big seats at a table are the people who can have a seat at any table in any event, should they choose to, because they can show up. So let's consider the consequences for this. And there are consequences for this, because realistically, the Charter does allow for independence movements. You know, Gandhi writes to Roosevelt about, I venture to think that the Allied Declaration, and this is published in various books, that the Allies are fighting to make the world safe for freedom of the individual and for democracy sounds hollow, so long as India, and for that matter Africa, are exploited by Great Britain. However, the fact is that as much as Roosevelt liked self-determination as a guiding principle, as a rule, he wasn't going to start that at the point in the middle of the war. And the fact is that as much as Gandhi tries to push for various things like the Quit India movement, etc., and various other things, there are 2.5 million troops who are recruited from India who fight during World War II. They fight for the Allies in Asia and North Africa, and they are the largest volunteer force recruited in the world at that time. And, however, because of the Charter, they keep raising the idea of independence once the war is over. And arguably, that's part of the reason why the Americans do the funny things they do with economics post-World War II. Roosevelt keeps lobbying others to keep arguing over it during the war. And he spends quite a lot of his time fighting what he considers to be some of Churchill's proposals that were going to secure the empire post-war, such as the Mediterranean strategy that would have allowed the British to increase their presence in the Middle East and Far East more quickly. This actually leads to Roosevelt and Churchill having quite a fallout over Stalin at Tehran and issues, and opposing Indochina, i.e. Vietnam's return to France. Stalin is wise enough to work out that Roosevelt is actually giving him a bit of a absolute rush on the idea, though, when he suggests the idea of reforming India on a somewhat Soviet line, because I think Stalin realizes that in many ways Roosevelt is trying to play the two off against each other for America's power, America's position. And the fact is, the British are trying to do the same with the Russians, and the Americans and the Russians are trying to do the same with the Americans and Brits. And that's the real consequences. The consequences of this are their empires. There are lots of empires around the world. And I would say the biggest consequence of this system is that, and this is when you get into trouble. But let me explain the policy as it goes forward. How do you maintain control in a colonial scenario? Usually you pick a minority, you arm them heavily, you make their position dependent upon you, you give them the power in the local military, the local police force, and that's how you do it, rather than sending out a load of colonial forces. And you really do train them up. Now the thing is, if you decolonize too quickly, and this is the fault of the colonizer. Please note, it is not a reflection on nations or people involved. It is a fault on the colonizer. And it sounds really evil, but let me explain. If you decolonize too quickly, there's a power vacuum. And the people who tend to be in the forces and the police and the forces tend to be already more organized, more prepared, and they step into the power vacuum. And the thing is, if there isn't other organizations similarly well built up, a civil service, a democratic government movement, all these things set up in a strong enough embedded position to resist them through force of presence, if not force of arms, you would tend to have a dictatorship take over. Usually because people go that way with the best intentions. Okay? They start out with best intentions. Oh, look at all this disorganization. It's terrible that there's people not being paid, there's this not being done, it's just being so ineffective. We've got to run it properly, we've got to look after our people. And you take over. Or alternatively, sometimes there are some who are just power hungry who are going, we've got all the guns. We can do this. We can be in charge. We can do a better job than this. Wanting the power and the glory. And so, whilst I wouldn't hold the Atlantic Charter responsible for this, I would hold quite a lot of American diplomacy based on the Charter responsible for this because of their pressure for it. They wanted to rewrite 200 plus years of colonial history, which is not a nice thing, overnight. And whilst you can do it in some countries like India, which had a thriving democracy movement, and even they've had issues, but India, Pakistan, these areas, you had more of a chance to do it. In other places, the organizations hadn't been furnished to exist. It really hadn't. And that's the fault of the colonial powers. But the reason the colonial powers had done that was to preserve themselves in power. So, again, this is no critique of the people there. This is a critique of, this is colonialism, this is its problem. So how long do you really need to decolonize? Well, honestly, the British plans, if you hadn't had World War I and World War II, the deminionization program was going on, was supposed to be completed by about 1970. That seems to be roughly, because they are talking about roughly a century in 1870 when they are really starting to get into it, and it starts to take place between 1870 and 1890. So roughly, they were expecting by then to have decolonized. But there are 2 world wars in between, and world wars, believe it or not, do not breed for good, growing democratic organizations. And there's also phases to it, and they're doing it in certain places first because they've got the thriving middle class, they've got the thriving, organizations they need to be that way, in the view of the people at the time, which was not necessarily right either. That's the thing, is decolonization was something no one really had much of an idea how to do. And you cannot argue decolonization in Canada, Australia, and some of those decolonization was necessarily 100% successful. There are a lot of indigenous peoples who would argue it wasn't. They were trying. They weren't necessarily good at it. The thing was, I think, pushing it. The Atlantic Charter makes for a good reason and a good argument to push it, because everyone signed up to this. And you're now poor. You have had World War I, you've had the Great Recession, you've had World War II, and then you've had the abrupt end of Lend-Lease without any heads up. And so you've had 4 massive economic shocks to your economy. You're broke. You're going to have to do this. It's not necessarily too fast for the colonial power, Alt 92. Honestly, Britain would like to do it quicker. Britain, you have to remember, the British policy for empire was supposed to be about economics. The moment an empire stops paying for itself, that's when Britain starts looking at decolonization. Matthew Keeling, that's said, no, it's not. The British have been doing dominionization for a long time. Now, dominionization is often not considered decolonization, but it is. It's just by a different way. And it's part of the transfer, because Britain was in the process of building. This is one of the interesting things. People believe the Commonwealth comes out of nowhere, but that was what the British were transitioning to. The idea was to transition from an empire to a Commonwealth. And that's what they're doing. They've got this long-term plan. That's one of the reasons why the Commonwealth works and why people transition to it. The Commonwealth really shouldn't come into existence. There is no natural reason for the Commonwealth to come into existence as a form. Oh, you're including from the whole period of the 1870s and time. Yeah, okay. I thought you were looking at post-World War II. I was going, no. And so, that's the thing. They are trying this. They're not necessarily doing it well, but they've been trying it. But the thing is, it's an interesting thing to talk about, because, you start talking about these things, looking at this and going, it's a complicated process to get it done. It's a complicated process to get it done and get it implemented. Because, again, colonial rule does not build a balanced society. And an imbalanced society normally ends up in a dictatorship very quickly. Because, how do I put this? Instability creates a power vacuum, into which will normally step whoever has controlled the guns. As said, and Mark has just put his code correct. Thing is, stable democratic government takes time. Representative government is a habit, and habits are acquired over time. Yes, habits are acquired over time. The habit of a peaceful transfer of power. The habit of what kind of rulers do you elect? And not even then, it's not always good. Yeah, the Commonwealth is an incredibly unusual structure. It's been a really weird structure, and the fact it's still growing. The fact is, the Commonwealth has been successful enough as a transition organisation that nations which were not British colonies have joined it. We're still taking colonies off the French. And again, please note again, it because if people are thinking this is a great thing, the British were planning out of no, it was a cunning plan, because their idea was A, they didn't want to be forced out like the Spanish had been, because that would create bad blood, hence the minimisation process. B, it creates an economic empire, with Britain still as its effect, magnifies British soft power, provides them basis for hard power, and people to sell weapons and stuff too. It's all considered. It's basically about transitioning from a mercantilist empire to a capitalist empire. That is it. Okay? Again, it's not being done. This is the other thing I have to try to remember. It's not necessarily out of the goodness of their hearts. It's pushing the costs local and the profits. Yeah. Oh, but again. Alarius, the Commonwealth is an unusual structure since most of the time in history when a power loses colonies, it's because they break away very violently, internally, or getting conquered by someone else. And the habit of trusting that you can get just vote the people out and don't need to do anything spicy to remove them, and the buggers, and they can trust they'll let us survive losing power too, makes a difference. Yeah. League of Nations and the mandate system are heavily influenced by the Commonwealth model. Two of the main architects were Commonwealth specialists. Yes. The League of Nations, the mandate model, is literally out of the Commonwealth book. It is literally Commonwealth doctrine coming through. It's one of the weirdest things to talk about with people sometimes, because the height of before Britain reaches the height of its empire in the 1920s, it's already planning the demise of its empire for the previous 50-odd years. This is the really weird thing. The British see their empire is not going to last forever, and start working on how to transition it to a different model which they can perpetuate before it even reaches its peak. And I'd argue that to an extent, whilst they don't realise it, the Americans have followed through on the idea of a capitalist empire, of an informal economic empire, post-World War II, with the Marshall Plan and various other systems around the world to prop up the democratic powers, the non-communist powers. But the thing is, the other problem you have in this post-World War II decolonization scenario is the Americans and the Soviets playing this game for who's going to have dominance. And they're prepared to pour money into anyone as long as they don't support the other side. And that creates a whole mess. And I would argue that, added to the speed that was forced to an extent on the colonial powers post World War II, is one of the reasons why you end up with the instability in Africa and South America to this day. Because of all that was going on. Because it was a heady mixture. It was a heady mixture going on in that part in the world. And the 200 years... This is the thing is... It's that you set up such an imbalanced system under colonialism. And you cannot right a wound that deep overnight. You just can't. So there are consequences of this this thing. There are consequences. Enlightened self-interest. Yeah. That is the modern phrasing. Enlightened self-interest sounds so much nicer than the way I put it. Yeah, the pushing the cost local and the profits to you. Yeah. And also, this is why I also say be very careful about assuming the British are completely broke post-World War II. One of the things is the British still find money for what they need to find money for. And there are various interesting points in the 1970s where the government is, but not necessarily Britain is. But the government is prepared to do what we need to go after the money where it actually is in Britain. At various points. Britain is always an interesting economy because Britain has been a world economic hub for a very, very long time. And a lot of the flows and the sinews of the money is not necessarily visible. And that's something which you have to deal with when you're doing an analysis of Britain's economics as a reality. So, I'd say also you have to realize that, and I want to add this onto Atlantic Charter as a factor, it was a bit of a random extra meeting and a bit of a covering material that has been turned into a lot of extra stuff. But both powers, when writing it, realized that they didn't realize how the world would be so different post World War II. America really didn't expect themselves to come out, and honestly, America at the end of World War II is almost as much of a unipower in the world as it is at the late 1990s, early 2000s. Realistically, is in some ways because of the economic damage that's been done. The other nations have the capability, but their economies are in ruin. That is true, Alcidius. It depends how you run an economic empire. If you run an economic empire for long-term benefit, you can make it mutually beneficial because that's how you achieve long-term benefit. As I try to explain, you regularly went. I'm in the business. Realistically, you could say as someone building this channel, and I'd love to build it faster. But the thing is, do I build for short term or long term? If I do want to build for short term, I do clickbaity topics. It helps. It will blow me quickly. If I wanted to do, I could do 10 reasons why Tirpitz was the best battleship of World War II, and I could get 1 million views. I can trust you that. There'd be people hate viewing it, people like viewing it, all those things. It would go straight out of the park. I know this because the amount of times YouTube suggests this to me on their AI algorithm as being a great idea. And that great big hit. And that short term, I've got a lot of views. But that's not good for me long term. If I want to build this channel long term so that I can keep it going for the next 20, 30, 40 years, maybe. I'd certainly love to. I don't know what I'll look like when I'm in my nearly 80, but, you know, if I'm still doing this channel, I'll be very happy if I am. Hopefully it'll be, you know, making enough money to keep itself going. Maybe by that point it'll be making enough money that'll be my sole account. It's far better to keep honest, and to keep honest to what I'm producing, than to produce that sort of stuff. Because if I produce that, that's not really me. It's not what I really do. And it's not going to attract the viewers who are going to get the best out of me. They're not really going to enjoy what I put out. So it's going to create a smash hit video, but it's not going to help me long term growing this channel. So it's better to keep sometimes to the videos I do put out. And there are some topics I know will not get a lot of views. It's like this one this evening. It hasn't peaked above 60 viewers the whole evening across both channels. It hasn't once peaked above 60. Does that bother me? No. And let's be honest, here's the really fun thing. The video I produced that came out with Drac last night was peaking at about 100 plus viewers while it was premiering. Oh yeah, Tirpitz is not the best battleship in mod. No, not even the best battleship starting with T. I rather quite like the Tegetovs, so I'd say they're better for their time than Tirpitz was, but leave that to one side. And yeah, there are lots of reasons not to go with that video. But the thing is, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'm happy with what I'm producing. That's honest. A few of your obscure targets that are in subtitles really intrigue me. Like your one about the Brits taking Hawaii a few months back. Yeah. And I get interesting comments from people going, that's different. That's different. And I like being that different. You know, you'll seen at the beginning, I've got a video coming up on the Western Whirlwind. And the Chickasaw in the Western Whirlwind. I'm doing that as my key aircraft. That is not the nicest way. If I wanted to do a key aircraft, which was just going to be a popular aircraft, I'd do the Huey. That'll get a lot more views than the Chickasaw in the Western Whirlwind. But I think they're good. They're good. My God, could we get you to make a video titled 10 Reasons Why Tirpitz was the worst battleship of World War II? That would be more tempting for me to make, honestly. That would be almost more tempting for me to make. But yeah, at the moment I think I'm servicing the battleship community enough with the videos I've got coming out with Drac. Because literally it is... Let's see, it's... the 13th we released the first video, the 27th is the second video, and if you all do want the live, that'll be on the 10th of September. That will be the 10th of September. And yeah, that'll be a live video with me and Drac both sharing Ultimate Admiral Dreadnought. In a nicest way. No. The Calvin Gansberg, if you build 3 extra Scharnhorst and you add on 15, they have, let's say, 6 15-inch guns rather than 9 11-inch guns on 3 of them instead of Bismarck and Tirpitz, that is actually probably a better formation because you end up with 5 ships to draw your force from. Just because the ball pit doesn't mean right now. Look, Michael Cooch, I like my limbs intact. It's bad enough that the man has, in the nicest way, I don't think he's ever going to forgive me for the Olympic. Because I assured him it's fine. It's fine. It's a Soviet submarine. You can go. Because Lembit is, it's a lovely boat. It is a lovely boat. And it's sitting in Tallinn. And it's, of course, a Vickers Armstrong built boat based on the U class. And if we'd looked at the Wikipedia page, we'd have worked that out. But none of us had looked at the Wikipedia page. We'd looked at the notes about the museum. We knew it was within range of us, and we thought, we'll just pop across. We've got an extra day. I said, don't worry, we've got an extra day. We'll just go across to it because there's a submarine there, and how often do we get to see submarines? It's a Soviet boat. We all know it's a Soviet boat. It'll be fine. I'll take the pictures. We'll come back. It'll be fine. Get there. That's the British. I'm going to say I used the word stern when I eventually spoke. I'm going to say I used the word stern, but Timu knows what I actually used. And I honestly think he's probably never going to be forgiving me for that. I have had to promise him that if we get a spare weekend at any point in the next 6 months, where I have the money and he has the money and we have a spare weekend, we are going to Tallinn to see the boat. I don't know, if you watch the beginning of yesterday's video where we're talking about this, look at his facial expression that it flashes to. That is not me, by the way, that editing. That's the way the program we're using saves the video, as that flash back and forth between the people who are speaking. Which I sort of not sure about, like, dislike, don't know about it, But it seems to be sensible because it, allows everyone to see it. No, outside this, we went and saw it. The thing is, Drac had to go home because he had something else. He had to go collect another errand. So he went and didn't see it. Me, Garius, Dan the chemist, and Timu went on the ferry from Helsinki to Tallinn, and we split up to go to the different museums into pairs so we could get the museums done in Tallinn quickly. And I walked with Timu to the old seaplane hangar, walked in, had dropped all my bags, had fun, got in and went, ah. And by that point, Drac was already on the plane, flying to the UK. It is still there. We can return. But, yeah, I was kind of a big doo-doo of that. I'm the one who organises these trips, and I get in the big doo-doo of it. Oh. Yeah. We have fun. Timu remembers the call I made. I still remember that when Garius turned up, he went silent for a full 10 minutes. Oh, God help us. And then we had the fun of clambering up the big arch to go over it to get pictures, and yeah, it was great. It was just, Oh, well, you see, the thing is, we picked our flights home because it was cheaper to fly home the next day, so we used that money for, you know, extra things, to stay in the hotel an extra night and see the lovely, go across to Tallinn and see the museum there, and oh, it was fun. Yeah, I don't know. Oh. Look, in a nicest way, while we were on the Scandinavia trip, I went swimming in the Arctic Circle and I went swimming in the Baltic. I'm happy. I can imagine the conversation wasn't suitable for little cousins. It was suitable for little cousins, mostly because he was. Yeah, he didn't blame me completely because he didn't know either, so neither of us knew. But yeah, it was a fun conversation. Small apologies going in. Actually, I'm still not sure who was more mad with me. It might have been him. It might have been Dr. Dan, because Dr. Dan loves the U-class submarines. He really does. And finding out there was a stepsister cousin of the U-class was sitting there in Tallinn, just sitting around, and he hadn't realised, was a bit, upsetting. But it's I will be going to visit again, and it's like I'm going to go visit the official Armstrong Whitworth Museum as well and things. Yeah, there were a lot of good ships there. A lot of good ships there. I highly recommend, by the way, if you go to Helsinki, the day trip to Tallinn is so worth it. It really is. The ferry is nice. The food on the ferry is quite nice. It was good. Timu, you knew it before we went to the museum. Didn't want to spoil the thing. Yeah, Timu, don't admit that. Don't admit that in a way Drac will ever hear about it. You will not. You might. He might bear a grudge. I can bear the grudge. I actually am good enough with swords. I can fight back. Um, oh, good lord. It was a fun time. It was a fun time. Oh, I have no doubt if we don't raise enough money for Fleet to go to Japan, he will bear a grudge. I don't think we will. I think we'll probably make it, though. I think we'll make it. Both me and Drac are us doing our best to secure as much backing and as much support as we possibly can do. So with that being said, I'm going to do, for about 45 minutes, we're going to do questions open, and I'm going to turn on the bot and see if that works. And if it does work, that'll be good. So let me just get things set up. Okay. Come on, you can get there. You can get there if you think you can. Come on. Bot slowly working. Slowly. Let's see if it actually starts up properly. Let's see, how much API calls do we have going out tonight? Night, the bot's not working yet, so I'm actually going to do this for a second until the bot's working. Try it again once the bot's working. Thanks, Lions. Next Thursday, I think we have a fun video. I'm trying to remember what videos we have next Thursday. I'm sure I have it written down somewhere. Next Thursday we have If 4Z Survives. Well, that'll be a fun one. Then we end August with the Battle of Winchelsea. You're going to enjoy that. You're going to enjoy that. But let's see if the bot's working. I don't think the bot's going to work this evening for some reason. The software keeps crashing on me. I'm getting the distinct impression the bot's not going to work this evening. So, are either Paul or Steve in the chat and happy to act as bot this evening, or shall I act as my own bot? Listen, no, I'm in Switzerland. No, don't worry. Thanks, Rana. Okay, Runon's going to be bot this evening. In between eating her chicken palm, Runon will be bot. And a knackered shoulder. Seriously, Runon, you've got to stop doing this to yourself, okay? I don't know how I can express this anymore. We like you as someone who's alive and viable to be a person and be a contributing member of society. Stop willingly hurting yourself so often. It's not good. So the question is coming in. When are you planning on doing the Trafalgar War game? Will it be shared on YouTube? Yes, it'll be shared on YouTube. When are we planning on doing it? Well, that was part of the idea for the trip, was to maybe do it on a certain thing in the trip, but if that's not being confirmed as being viable, so it will probably get done. This is the interesting thing, because we need all four of us to be together, and theoretically we have the 21st of October in this trip, but there is the whole debate of where we are, when we are, and whether Gareth is going to be with us, because he's a big part of the Trafalgar trip. And technically, on the 21st of October, we are supposed to be flying home, and I've arrived in London. So technically, we could possibly do it then. And I'm not supposed to be on the train to Cornwall to the 22nd. Theoretically, he says. If everything works out as it's supposed to. As it's supposed to. But we'll see. I'd like to point out that the cheapest flights, return flights, are roughly £3,000. Mainly because for a fair number of us, it's not necessarily advisable for us to stop in Hong Kong. That's probably ego talking, but also, yeah, let's just be careful. So we might get it done. We might not. There are plans. There are plans to film it and to put it out. There are lots of discussions and plans and things to put out. One of the options I have put is when we finally finished, when we finish, it's going to sound strange, to do it in here, in my office space, because once the garage and extension have been added onto this house, there's a lot of these boxes are moving, and there's going to be a large space in here, and we could set up a very big table in here and just film it in here, and we've got all the computers, everything here to do it. But it's a case of it's got to be sorted out, it's got to be done, and it's going to be done. And we have a plan. There's about 3 different battles which we're going to do. We're going to do not just Trafalgar. There's going to be a battle from the Scandi trip, and there's going to be a battle from the Japan trip as well. We're going to do. We're planning on doing. So we're planning on redoing 3 battles. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I will be flying from Heathrow. I don't like to fly back in or out of Gatwick, because every time I fly through Gatwick, something goes wrong. I don't know what it is about Gatwick Airport, but every time I touch that airport, something goes wrong. Seriously, every single time. Lions, yeah, the Warhammer barn is the family barn, and the trouble with filming it there is, well, A, that means I have to get family permission. B, we have to sort out things about it, and even we don't tend to even film our own games in there, or film anything in there at all, because of the way it's set up and how much the family uses it. Plus, that means we have to get a time when it's not in use for an actual game going on. And that's a problem, because it's the family barn, sort of, if the games are being played, the things are left out, and then when people return, they get to play their moves again and continue the games on. And this is a problem. It has been considered, trust me. No, avoid Gatwick. The ship-shaped links are in my descriptions. Are they in my... I should add them into my Twitch description, aren't they? They're not in that. They're not in that. So, 9681's question. How much Atlantic Charter would be acceptable to British if they weren't being bombed? Oh, they'd have still taken most of it online, because they could pay lip service to most of it. The thing is, they'd probably reorder some of it and rephrase it to make it even more vague for them. Up to 5 links can be added. I'm moving to Facebook. I'm sure I have shipshape somewhere on there. Running around. I like how I mysteriously change image now. If you go to my shipshape profile, I mysteriously change image between you clicking on the picture, and I am apparently called the Destroyer King. I'll take that. But yes, the Atlantic Charter, basically the British. There is nothing in it which you haven't found in other pronouncements of the British before. Okay, from their war aims and their policies. The issues you generally have for the British with it are some of the things about self-determination. They would like self-determination. They'd like some of these rights to be, they'd like them to be implemented. They do want to implement them. That's part of the decolonization process. But they don't want them to be trunted up to as a charter so that they can take their time with it. The big British problem, and this is the thing which comes up with decolonization quite a lot, is rather a patriarchal one, but it's also not necessarily a bad problem thing, is that their thinking is they've mucked these countries up by making colonies, and if they muck them up even worse in the process of turning them into dominions, then they will have a moral obligation to go and be the ones to try and sort it out. You could only argue that in some regards the Americans' pushing and haste removed the some of the British feelings about moral obligation about being the ones to go sort out the problems, and transferred it to the Americans. Although there again, when the Americans did step into colonial powers like Grenada, it did cause upset. You couldn't on YouTube see a link in the description on YouTube. Where did Shipshape go? Oh, I have to go through and add it as a standard. I'm trying to remember what Dan Freeman's YouTube channel's called. Give me a second to go to my own view your channel, go to my own homepage, Not members, friends. At the Dr. Monkey. There we go. And I'm going to add that into my standard. It's always fun. It's always fun to make these things, fix these things. Thank you for spotting that. I hadn't realised it had gone. I really hadn't realised it had gone. There we go. Thank you, Alfredo. So, any questions? Because this is the question time period at the end of the channel. Let's see. Frank Belmont. FDR and his staff, knowing that at least 10 fast battleships in Essex gang are paid for in 1941, had anything to do with his ideas? Then again, it was all public information. Yeah, it does give him a bit of a whip hand, a bit of a strong force coming. He's got the 10 fast battleships, he's got the Essex Collective coming along. You know, he's got a nice force coming along. Books. Which area of books would you like to go for? So, I usually start people off with naval history. There are some. It depends what you want to read. Do you want to read an overview of events? In which case, the Nicholas Rogers series is a pretty good starting point because they usually cover pretty much everyone. Despite it being titled Naval History of Britain, it is pretty much everyone. There's also Andrew Lambert's Admirals, which is always a good one. If you want an introduction to sort of World War One stuff, there's Robert K. Massey's Dreadnought and Castles of Steel series. You know, it's what would you like? Wow. That's some interesting artwork, Orfriedel. That's already been dealt with. Yeah, I think they've been dealt with by the bots, by the mods. Do bots come on stream here on here? Yeah, there are bots, but sometimes those things can get through bots. So, Master Walder, what books would you like? And this is why we have admins. Because they tend to deal with things like that. Yeah, I know. You look for go looking. Ronan, seriously, this is all on you as the senior admin. You look away, and that happens. I was just quickly finding my admin page. But it happens. Some people have some real desire for artwork. But yes. What's the area of topic would you like? Basically, Master Volta. What would you like to look at? What would you like to talk about in terms of what's your area of naval history which is interesting you? Because if you're interested in the Japanese side, there's books to start off there. There's that's the one thing about naval history. We do have a lot of interesting history books to start off from. As even if you want to, if you're of that inclination, this is usually quite a good starter book as well for some people. Naval Operations of the War Between Great Britain and the United States in 1812 to 1815 by Teddy Roosevelt. Now, as long as you read this with the idea that this is a person who's looking to become maybe president in the future, and who is also putting forward his views on why the US Navy should be funded better and why the US, then you read it with that in mind, it makes a lot of sense. But as said, the Nicholas Rogers series, if you like Age of Sail stuff, or even... This is a good one because it covers everyone. If you like the Treaty Era and you want to learn more about the ships in the Treaty Era and the navies in the Treaty Era, then there are good old John Jordan series. The Warships After Washington and the Warships After London. Great starting point. And they're good reads to start off with. Already mentioned Admirals and Massey's Dreadnought and Castle Steel series. What else we do have? It's good starting points. Where's a good starting point on the... Well, I've talked about the good starting points in the US Navy. And if you're interested in the French Navy, this is a good starting point. The French Fleet, Ships and Strategy and Operations, 1870 to 1918. Really does give you a lot of details about what the French are getting up to and why they're getting up to it. Which is always worth reading. But there's more about the French. If you want a good, interesting overview for World War I, it's Norman Freeman's Fighting the Great War at Sea, which is a massive tome and an interesting read for an overview. Well, that one goes up there, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. If you want to do the US entry into World War II, there's this one, which is called The First Team, which is by Lundstrom, John B. Lundstrom, and it's the Pacific Naval Air Combat from Pearl Harbor to Midway. And it's a really interesting read, and as you can see, it has very, very old bookmarks in here from me, including a Sainsbury's receipt from God knows how many years ago. Can't remember the last time I shopped at Sainsbury's. Yeah, Runon, but people like to make you do paperwork because you're good at it. There are usually bots on stream. The bots do quite a good job. I had to have a conversation with a bot recently, so that's it's a case of that kind of thing. The bots tend to be not so good at filtering out, but we'll see. The bot should have caught that. The bot should have caught that. Wondering why the bot didn't catch that, actually. Because normally, if you put in capitals and too much caps, then a certain bot comes... A Nightbot does like to cause issues. And... But yeah... But apparently Nightbot has managed to deactivate itself for some reason. And it should be working now. It should be, he says. And now... Yeah. I always love it when it has to end up having to do admin because someone's being weird. It's always fun. So that's Nightbot re-enabled. Not sure why it decided to disable itself. Right then. So that should work. Let's go to new command. Alright. I'll sort that out in a second. That's obviously what I'm going to have to end up spend the evening sorting out. Some of the joys to do with... How do I put it? Channel admin. Ay, caramba. That was boring. ASCII art deserves better. Yes, all 92, it does. ASCII art does deserve better, and ASCII art has got something. It has often been better in its past. That's why I don't put chat in my video feed. Ooh. Anyway, I'm going to say, if everyone's happy and there's no more questions in the chat, and I don't think there are any questions in the chat because no one have turned up, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'm going to go check on the puppies and check everyone's okay, and then I'll be on Discord if everyone would like to chat there. What else have we got coming up? Well, this week I know what we've got coming up because I've got it already recorded. As you might have noticed, I'm starting to try and push really far ahead with my recordings of things. We have on the 15th, we have Sir Eustace Tennyson Denicourt. That's a premiere. Then we have the Battle of the Nile on the 16th. Nelson's most decisive victory. We have the Col Naval coming out on the 19th. The Grom A6 Intruder on the 22nd. The What Changes of the Royal Navy Tribal Class gets built with 4.5-inch guns on the 23rd. And then it goes on. And on. And it's looking pretty good. So thank you very much, Aaron. I have one more question, apparently, in the chat that I've missed. Do you know what the 2 points of the charter that got deleted were? I think both sides had their own ideas for what those 2 points would be. But it's an honest thing because we know both were proposing 10 points. But as said, it is such a fudged together quick document to provide the absolutely sparsest diplomatic colour to what was a military alliance meeting. No one's quite sure. No one's quite sure. I know. Thank you very much, Aaron. Take care and chat soon. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and supporting all this. It's really nice of you. And Lee was off in radar school, yes. Take care, everyone. Toodles. In answer to Robert's question, Robert M. Duven's questions, this is a pretty good one. U.S. Marine Corps Aviation since 1912. It's a pretty good one to read. There are similar books, Development of the Fast Carrier, etc., which are available, but this one's a really good one for U.S. Naval Aviation. Yeah, that's the one I go with. Take care.